element type that we're going to release soon. It's basically just one element, and you have the ability to select the different chart type that you want to represent on that chart. So in this example that I set up here, we have an area chart, we have a bar chart, a column, a histogram, we have a line chart here, and then lastly, we have a pie chart. So all of these charts are driving off of a Bildr data collection, which actually have the data hidden here. So this is the sample data that I set up that basically drives the data points on all of these charts. So with the element type, it's gonna come with two actions that we built for this. And the first one is just a simple refresh action. Basically what that does is it's just gonna refresh the data points on the chart that you target. So for example, in my sample data, I have this value here. So if I were to change that from 1200 to 200, that's going to save the value to the database and then refresh the charts to represent that data. So if I were to put it back, it does the same thing there. So that's what the refresh action does. If I hide my sample data, the second action type that we have here is the ability to change the chart type on a specific chart that you have on the page. So for example, I created this select here with the different chart options. And right now this is targeting this first chart here. So if I toggle that to bar, notice it changes that to bar and etc. So you can just toggle between that. So in a project, if you have limited real estate and you don't want to show different charts, you can just set up this action and allow the user to change between the types as needed. So if I just set that back, and that puts it back. So let's take a look at the studio here. So this is the page that we were looking in the live view. And if we select our Google chart and go to the properties, these are the different property arguments that we have available. And can you guys see these okay? Or do we need to make this a little bigger?
I can see it pretty well. I have a big screen though.
Okay. So the first argument we have is the chart type. So this is where you can set the default. And again, this gives you the different options that we've included in this element type. The second option is additional settings, like if you want to control labeling on the chart. So if I toggle this to on, you'll notice that this shows me these additional inputs. I'm actually not using any of these because when I created my page, I just used the standard Bildr element to represent the title. But for example, if I were to use that, notice what that does is that does render that title within the chart. And you have a couple options, like if you want the title to go inside of the chart. So that's what that does here. And I'll go ahead and put it back. So that's what the title does. And then there's also other settings for the horizontal axis title and the vertical title axis. But again, those are all just options that you guys can control. So I'm going to hide those for now. The next thing that we have is the data. So this is how to set up the data on the chart. In my setup here, I'm pulling it from a data collection, but you can technically pull it from an API or anywhere you need to. The only difference is since I'm using the Bildr data collection, I'm just using the binding under the data as opposed of using like a set value action to set the data onto the chart, but both methods will work. So if we go to data first, under my collection list, I created a data collection just called company preferences. I'm grabbing all the fields just because I'm basically setting the full array of data into that chart. One important thing is the sort, because I want my data information to be organized by the year in ascending order. So that's what that's doing here. And if we go back to the properties, the first thing that we need to define is the reference to use for the labels. So in this case, I'm again selecting my company performance data collection, and then I'm telling the chart to use the year field for the label. For the data points, now this is an array, so you can add as many as you need. In my setup here, I basically have a sales field and expenses field, and that's what's plotting these data across these two different chart colors here that you see here.
Dorian, just to interrupt real quick, the fields that you've got selected here, are these native to Bildr? Like these are from, you set up a data collection in Bildr, you added fields to it, and then you associated them here to these input arguments for the charts element?
Exactly, and the UI is a little updated. This is a little sneak peek of the new changes that are coming with the data. But basically, if I go to my data collections, this is that collection I created, and these are just the 3 fields that I created just for this sample data. So that's correct. This is all pulling from a Bildr data collection.
But you could also pull or associate these from like an external data collection, like if you were using Airtable or
Exactly.
something else. Okay, cool.
Yeah, the only difference would be is here, instead of pulling this from a field, because the field setting is basically pulling from a data collection field in Bildr, you would either pull that from a variable, or if you already have that stored from an element, it just depends on the setup, but it's fully
Okay, cool.
dynamic to get it from wherever you need with that data.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
The next argument that we have here are the colors. So if you notice here, I have this empty, so it's just setting the default colors. But if I explicitly wanted to say, just use green and yellow, then that
Ooh,
will
I like that.
and change the colors. And the way you enter those, they're just comma separated colors. So pretty straightforward. There's additional options. I'm not going to go over everything, but there are some of these that are specific to the chart type. So like this chart, this curve type, if you notice here, it does say line chart type only. It's not going to have any effect if you toggle that on an area chart. But if you do go to a specific line chart, if I go back down, so notice if I turn off the curve, then it doesn't look as smooth as with the curve method on. So you just have to keep an eye out for some of those properties based on the chart type. Let's see what else we have here. The last thing I want to go over on the properties is the animation. So if we go back to the live view and we do the refresh, that's what's doing the nice animation effect here when this gets refreshed, and it also does it on initial load of the chart. But you can control that by toggling this on and off. And you can also set the animation method and then the duration.
Very cool. I didn't realize that y'all were including that
Yeah.
on here.
So yeah, that's Google Charts. So, oh, actually, before I can just show really quick how I'm binding or setting up the actions. So the refresh, just on events, on click, it's calling this flow that I just called refresh charts too. And there's actions in here. So if we just type Google, these are the 2 action types that are going to come with that element type. So the first one on the list here is the chart type. This is to change it. And then the second one is the refresh. So here on the refresh, you just have one argument. It's basically targeting the chart that you're trying to refresh. In my setup, because I have multiple, I just created multiple actions pointing to the different charts. So it just updates all of them for me. And if we look at the select, this one on the change event is calling my flow called change chart type. And this one's calling the other action. There's just 2 arguments we're filling in. We're selecting the chart to target, and then we're selecting where we're getting the value for the chart type, which in my setup, I'm getting it from this select, which already has the values in here. And for the values, if we go to the properties, on the select, this is what's building that menu here. So the key thing to know is if you are changing the type, you do have to specify the value for the chart type to be exactly as it is in that render function.
Okay. And what are the types right now, Dorian?
Right now we have area, bar, column, histograms, line, and pie.
All right. I love pie. Okay. So quick question. What you're showing us here, it looks like you've have a page and then you added the chart element a few different times. And what you did is you set each one of those element instances, like you configured the settings differently so that one would be a example of a area chart, then a bar chart, and then a line chart, like all the different options. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Cool. And and then, so how did you do the select chart type? Did you just add a selection field and then you set up those actions?
Exactly. Basically, you just add a select element to the page. When you do that under the properties of a select, this is where you define the select options. That's basically the menu. And I just filled in all the values, as these have to match the actual element type render function. And then you can also control the display. So like, for example, the internal value has to be area or lowercase, but my display is area with capital, just to give it a nicer look for the end user.